Guys, welcome back to the Astro Imaging channel. Tonight's session, no specific topic. It's going to be an open session, open discussion on basically anything that comes up. As I keep my eyes on the bottom here, waiting for some viewers to pop in the room. Otherwise, I'm not really speaking to anybody. I do want to say we're always looking for presenters. We're always looking for people to submit images of the week and all that stuff. And on that same note, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show off our image of the week. Guys, I'm getting a little bit of reverberation or something, so someone has to shut their mic off if you don't mind. Awesome. This week's image of the week, I hope you can see it, goes to Tolga, the Ghost of Cassiopeia, which I'm not sure of the designation of this one, but a really cool H-alpha nebula. Really nice tight stars on that, great diffraction spikes. And of course, as always, we'll give Tolga an opportunity to speak about this next week. I don't think last week's winner was is in the room. So basically, I will try and find the right page to click here and take the screen back. And good, people are in the room. I always get nervous until I see someone in the room. So like I was saying, no specific topic. So throw anything you want into the chat, and we'll basically discuss the topic.
Adam,
yes.
Before we get too far down the road, you know, we got a couple of Sundays, I think, coming up on the 25th and on January 1st.
Aha.
Let's schedule not meeting that.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I'm just reading the comments, sorry. Yeah, nothing on Christmas Day, nothing on New Year's Day. So I guess we have a couple weeks off. That's my wife in the background going woohoo. So this is a question for me, it sounds like. Blastroid mentioned in the past video I upgraded from the AT10RC, or excuse me, from the Edge HD to the AT10RC for faster f-stop. Why not Hyperstar with the Edge HD instead of the expensive upgrade? I have a great answer to that. Okay, so basically I had the Edge HD 800 and I really liked my field of view. I thought any more focal length due to my seeing wouldn't really give me that much gain. And the thing that I didn't like about the Edge HD was it was just a little bit too slow at f8-ish when I'm using the reducer. It was still a little bit slow to pull, even with 30-minute subs on H-alpha objects, there was still stuff that I was kind of reaching for. So keeping in mind that I wanted the same field of view, that pretty much pointed me, so in a sense I knew the field of view that I wanted, and I knew that I wanted to go faster. How much faster do I want to go? Well, basically I had to look and see what was available, and it turned out that yeah, the Hyperstar would have been much faster, but I believe I would have had to have gone up to like C14 to get a similar field of view, and that might not even do it. I'm trying to think. 14 2.8, right? No, so that I don't think would give me even the same field of view that I was getting with my scope.
Adam,
so, yes.
have you noticed the difference in star sizes, the large stars, between the Edge HD versus the RC?
Well, so I'm not quite comparing apples to apples because the RC is a 10-inch, the Edge is an 8-inch, the RC is reduced more. So I think that means that my stars are supposed to appear smaller in my image circle, I think.
I'm not talking about overall size. I'm talking about specifically large stars. What happens to the large stars with the Edge HD optics?
I think that the all the glass in there somehow I think does spread the stars out a little bit more. Excuse me. I think that it could be the corrector, it could be some of the lenses inside of the scope, but just thinking back, I mean, I do remember a lot of people commenting on just the look of stars in an SCT, and I think that is probably what we're seeing. I think it just, whether it's the corrector, whether it's probably the corrector if people were saying it before the Edge HD came out, just a little bit more light spread on the actual glass.
I mean, that's the reason why I went from the C11 to the 10-inch RC. Same way, you went from a C8 to a 10-inch. I went from a C11 to the 10-inch because I think that, I don't know what happened. Maybe is it the diffraction spikes that maybe hide the flaws maybe sometimes?
Well, I hope not. It probably does hide some of the flaws, but honestly, like an RC is an imaging system, so it is, I believe, better. I believe it does have just better performance across the board. Obviously, everything's a toss-up because the RC is, what is it? The RCs have no coma, but they have no chromatic aberration, but they do have spherical aberration, I think it is. Whereas the edges have coma and spherical aberration, I believe.
The RC has astigmatism.
Astigmatism, right? Okay, yeah. So I mean, everything's a toss-up, but the RC is basically optimized for imaging. So I think that has something to do with it.
Yeah, for our photographic reasons, we need a corrector or something in the RCs to get rid of the astigmatism. For science, they don't care because the centroid of the stars of your objects is correct. So if you're doing photometry or something like that, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, Sean's saying RCs have better spot size, which I believe is true. And Mike is saying RC is designed as an imaging research platform. So they're basically just, they call the SCT a jack of all trades. Well, that also means it may not be a master of any one particular trade. So if you want to view through it, great. If you want to image through it, good. But RC's optimized for imaging. Edmund is planning on moving from a cool DSLR to a mono. Should he use a light pollution filter instead of a luminance, and together with an RGB, or is it necessary he lives in a red zone? I think if you ask this to a bunch of different people, they're all going to give you different answers. I do not use first of all, I wouldn't stack the filters, and I think more people are going to say that is don't stack the filters because you're going to be more susceptible to reflections or any sort of issue that could sneak up on you that way. In regards to replacing your luminance with a light pollution filter, possibly. I don't do that, but I also don't use my luminance filter because it is very, well, there's lots of light pollution. But the way I look at it, I'll just give you my thinking on this, is the RGB filters do cut out some of the light pollution, and a better designed RGB set should, I'm not going to say block out the same amount of light pollution as a light pollution filter, but it's going to probably hit a lot of the same important wavelengths that light pollution is really prevalent in. So by just shooting R, G, and B, and then extracting my luminance from that, I think I first know that I get a better matching between the luminance and the RGB channels, but I also think in that sense I'm taking advantage of the built-in light pollution resistance that the RGB filters have. So I hope that answers my perspective well, which isn't necessarily the right one. It's just my rationale for not wanting to stick a luminance filter in my filter wheel, or I should say that. Not necessarily, well, I used to not have a luminance filter in my filter wheel. Now I have a luminance filter in there so that I can shoot my narrowband and focus with my luminance. But that's basically my thinking behind that. I don't know. Do we have any people in the room that shoot mono and keep a light pollution and use a light pollution filter as their luminance channel?
I did for a while. I used a CLS CCD, and it worked pretty well for some galaxies, but it doesn't work very well for dust. I think that maybe a lot of the reflection dust was kind of in that same band that it was actually blocking out. For galaxies, since you're gathering the whole galaxy, it seemed like it did a little bit better than actual dust in our galaxy, or dust inside of our galaxy.
Okay, yeah.
I use that as well. When I used to shoot from my house, it really made a big difference instead of using all. My problem was the focus difference between the Astrodons and the CLS CCD. It was just I couldn't rely on the autofocus to reliably go from one focus because one filter is 1 millimeter thick, the other one is 3 millimeters thick. So, but it was only a thing that applied to me. If you all had astronomic filters, I'm sure that would be no problem.
Yeah, that's a good point. But I don't know if Astrodon actually, I don't think they make light pollution filters. So if you're using Astrodons, the answer is no, right? Tolga would know the answer to that.
Well, it's not no that you would have to plan it. You would have to shoot your CLS one night and your RGBs the other night. If you wanted to do automated, I found that it had the focusing program had a difficulty going between filters.
And
If you were going to shoot this CLS all night, no problem.
Okay, I know. Thinking back, I know I read something that says Astrodon himself doesn't use a light pollution filter, and I think the rest of his comment was it's easy enough to get rid of gradients in post processing, which when I read it at the time, I thought, yeah, right, it's easy enough, isn't it? But after getting better using PixInsight, kind of figuring out DBE, I'll say I no longer really have any problems with gradients, except on the most unique of images, dust all over the place. But even then, I don't think it's that much of an issue.
Yeah, I've really come to agree with that too, and just use a luminance filter. I mean, you have to be realistic what you're shooting from bad light pollution. You're not going to get super faint reflection dust from, skies that are 17 SQM, but in general, I've come to agree with that as well. And just a plain luminance filter seems to do the job.
I'll know soon enough when I start shooting luminance again. Got to try things. Actually, and I'll say this, just because I say no and Josh says he tried it, but it didn't quite work, still try it, because depending on where you are in your imaging, your processing, sometimes some restrictive portion that's cutting out dust, you may still have better results than your processing abilities can give to you. So it's worth trying, but also I always say if you learn something on your own, if you say to yourself, well, someone told me that this was a bad idea, and then I tried it, and yeah, it was a bad idea, then you know why.
I also see there's a question on why focusing with the CLS CCD and then also the Astrodons would be challenging. And it's really an issue on faster telescopes, but the Astrodons are 3 millimeters thick and the CLS CCD is 1 millimeter thick. So it's not actually focusing your main camera that's an issue. If you have an off-axis guider, then your guide camera will be, so you can't get in the middle of them on a very fast telescope and maintain focus on your off-axis guider camera. If you have a separate guide scope, that should not be an issue.
Yeah, that's right. I forgot. Yeah, that was the actual problem, Josh. You're right.
You're answering my question there about to Tolga about why your program.
Correct.
Okay, and for those of us who use an off-axis guider that picks off before the filter, it's a moot point.
Correct.
Also, just in this discussion, there are various types of light pollution filters, and wouldn't its effect have a lot to do with what the pass ranges are on those particular filters? For instance, if your town happens to use a lot of those orange lights and your luminance or your light pollution reduction filter cuts out a lot of that light, it seems like it might have a benefit. But I'm just talking in theory. I don't use one of them at all.
Yeah, and it's also true depending on what targets you're shooting. If you're shooting blue reflection dust, a lot of times that might make it through something like an IDIS filter. As if you're shooting like brown reflection dust, that will never make it through a CLS CCD, at least in my case. So it really depends on the light pollution you have and the target you're shooting.
Greg's asking, does anyone make a fairly narrow filter that passes both H alpha and O3, which would allow bicolor narrowband capture with the DSLR or a one-shot color CCD? And I think that's where you actually get into light pollution filters. Because if you look to the specific light pollution filters and if they publish their curves, you can basically see a few variations of the filters, some which are more restrictive, but in general, I think they tend to be more restrictive around closer to the O3 lines, because the O3 tends to be where light pollution is. And then if you're letting, yeah, so I don't think anyone actually makes what you're looking for, but you might be able to find what you're looking for in one of the stronger cutoff light.
Yeah, the IDIS V4, I think, is probably the closest to that, which lets in an O3 and an HA pass that are tighter than most UHC filters.
I don't know if this is true anymore, but I thought Orion used to make a nebula filter that was also, it allowed just O3, HA, S2 through and cut most everything else out.
They did. I think it still does exist. I think it is pretty much a UHC filter also.
Okay.
Yeah. So they kind of exist, but they don't refer to them in the way that you're referring to them. They basically just are general light pollution filters. But IDAS, what is it? Is that UTEC? IDAS? I think it's UTEC.
LPS4, I think, is the one that has the tightest cutoffs.
I pulled up something on my screen. I don't know if you guys can see it. I'm screen sharing. And this is what we're talking about for those that aren't used to looking at the pass bands of light filters. And you can see that mercury vapor comes in down here, comes in here, sky glow, and then sodium, which is a popular, these are things that are blocked out. Here's something that you get H beta and coming in, and hydrogen's coming in very clearly, but the stuff in between is blocked. So is this the kind of filter you're looking for? Obviously, it is not narrow band, it's broadband, but it cuts out where a lot, this right in here is where a lot of the light pollution is coming from. It's green, a lot of it is green.
Here's, I don't know if you can see the one that I pulled up on my screen. Here's the pass band of the IDIS LPS V4. And you can see it's fairly narrow around hydrogen alpha, maybe only, maybe 15 or 20 nanometers. And then around the O3, it's quite a bit wider. I think it's maybe like maybe 50 nanometers or something like that. But that's the tightest one that I know that lets them go through.
Cool. Okay. Cheers from Italy. Cheers from the U.S. Italy, you're up late.
Adam, I had a couple questions that came in, and while we're kind of going through gaps in the questions, we'll answer some of the Facebook messages we got. I don't know if we'll donate a whole episode to windbreaks and wind shelters, and maybe we will, but there was one specifically asking about wind shelters for star parties and different tents and stuff like that. So I was just going to share a couple images of the different options, and one is the Kendrick tent. Now Kendrick doesn't make this version of this tent anymore. They make a newer version, but this older version you can see has an awning that basically gives you a little room out front, and then it also gives you what is basically like a dome or something that you can open up top, and then this whole area actually closes in with a zipper. My experience with these is that they're very good if there's not much wind, and they're really comfortable inside. There's a separate sleeping room that you could see in that previous image. And this would be the sleeping room, and maybe where you put your computer. There's usually enough room for like a little cot or a bed, and then also for your computer. And then you have the observatory room next to it. So those were really cool and a lot of fun. I think that the newer ones are not quite as big. But like I said, they're just not very useful when the wind is really strong, because they don't really provide much of a windbreak. So if you're looking for something that's more like a strong windbreak, then these things, if you have been to, I guess, almost Heaven Star Party or the Winter Star Party or Okie-Tex or Texas Star Party, any of those, you'd probably see these things. And I guess a lot of people have generic versions, but the popular one is the Skybox that John Lev makes. And I think he's probably got like 30 or 40 of these out there. These things are very, very robust, and they've been in windstorms, rainstorms up to like 50, 60 miles an hour. And it's funny, on nights when it's really windy out there, a lot of people will complain about how they weren't imaging at all night long, and everyone who has one of these a lot of times doesn't even know what they're talking about. So these are made out of conduit, and they have a handful of connectors over here. Different versions that people make, and sometimes they'll put little roofs or dark rooms over them. So at one point, that's what I did here, where I put a little dark room and was running 2 telescopes on the side of it. And you can get these in 8x8 or 8x16. So they're very, very good at wind protection, especially at any of those star parties that see much wind.
Josh, how much room does that take when you're all collapsed with the tarp?
They all fit, like all the, sorry, got all kinds of stuff going on here. Those will take up, I guess, about a tub, one of those large Tupperware containers for the tarps and for the bungee cords and for all these little fittings in the corners and stuff like that. But then if you want to put these poles in your car as well, the long ones are 6 feet, and that's for the tall ones here. Yeah, typically I think you've got, 3, 9, so 3, 6. I think you have about 8 for an 8x8, and not quite double that for 8x16. So you have these 8-foot ones, and then you have a bunch of 4-foot sections, and they pack out of the way pretty easily, except for you just need a stretch that's 6 foot long. So if you have like a little SUV, they'll just kind of tuck into the side of your SUV if you're packing them. But the remainder of the stuff takes up about one of those large Tupperware containers. And you can actually, I think you can see, yeah, these Tupperware containers right here. Those are, when I was carrying them, I would just put one of these inside the other, and then all the tarps and the fittings and stuff would go in there.
Did you say the pipes are galvanized? Like they're metal, right?
They're metal. They're conduit, like electrical conduit. I think that these ones, I want to say they're 3/4 inch conduit.
Okay. How do the fittings attach?
So I don't have many close-ups, but you can see this little eye bolt right here, where my cursor is. So there's T's, and then there's corner ones where you've got 3 different directions, and basically the conduit just slips in to these T's are welded, and the corner ones are welded where you've got a long straight section and then one coming off of it, and then so you just slide the conduit into it, and then you tighten up these eye bolts.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so I have a very similar setup to that. I just ended up building it myself rather than purchasing it. And the cost savings is significantly cheaper if you were to build it yourself. Granted, you got to go out and source all the parts. There's a company out in Arizona where you can get, I think, just about 90% of the material that you need, with the exception of the canvas. And in the place where Josh is using an eye bolt, I just simply drilled right through the conduit and the T sections, and then just use a bolt and nut on the other end. It works well as well.
The advantage of the screw there is that you can, it stays, it's captured, it stays there. You loosen it up a little bit, pull the pipes apart. That's it. You don't have to get it exactly in the hole or anything. One thing I do want to warn people about, I mean, yes, you should be able to build one of these very simply. Some people make them out of PVC, but they crack and stuff like that. Those metal corners are available. They have nothing to do with astronomy. You can find them in display cases and stuff like that. But at any rate, you are making one huge wind catcher here.
Yep.
And be very careful that it is anchored somehow. And among the ways to anchor them, a lot of people think of putting down, like a bag of sand or something like that. Yeah, I've seen that. I've also seen the wind actually pick those bags of sand up and move them. And they just watch out. When the wind really gets going, take the thing apart. It's not time to be doing astronomy anymore.
Now you really want to use guy ropes on these. You don't want anything,
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't want anything that can slide. Guy ropes are, I mean, you can't pick this thing up with, you can't even crow it up when you use, basically use 2 in every corner.
Yeah, if you've got the right guy ropes, and then if you're
Yeah.
using a right length of spikes, it's completely fine and solid. And if you're really, really worried, on top of that, just do what most backpackers will do, pick up rocks and put them on top of the spikes as well to further secure it.
Yeah. And I sound like Debbie Downer here. I'm really not morally opposed to these things, but watch your guy ropes now. Now that you've added guy ropes and it's dark because it's astronomy time, watch out where those guy ropes are running.
You can get glow-in-the-dark guy ropes.
Well, but both of those are good points, but actually what we've been doing that's been much nicer is you can run them right along the interior here, along the interior of these walls, because what you don't want are long guy ropes coming out on the outside.
Yeah.
Whenever people are trying to walk around, even if you have glow-in-the-dark ones, it makes it for a really clean, compact setup. You just run, 2 from each corner, so you run one diagonally that way and one coming down diagonally this way. Same thing along this wall, one that way, and then one coming down this way. So that way you can get tons of those ropes. They're all going at the right angles. If you have any question about the structure of it, ask somebody who knows. Get somebody who knows something about structure, because these aren't things to mess around with, because it definitely gets windy and it's a giant sail. And I've definitely been to star parties where I've seen some of these people make them and don't get them tied down properly, and they're not constructed properly. I've seen them pick up, and you see this huge 8-foot octagon just tumbling, across the star party, and a lot of expensive gear and cars, and on top of that, it's just dangerous. Could knock someone over. So make sure if you're doing something like this, just to know what you're doing and really get it secured down properly.
How do you like that tent? You prefer this new your new wind shield, right, over the tent?
Yeah, the tent was it was very cool. It was comfortable. It was neat. Definitely have enjoyed staying in a trailer and having the skybox much more than the tent. And honestly, every star party I've been to regularly has pretty challenging imaging conditions. I think the only one I've ever been to that wasn't quite windy was the Chiefland Star Party, but anywhere in Texas or Oklahoma, West Virginia, even in the Keys, it's always windy. And you always hear people complaining about it. So, it's just the way to go, honestly.
Randy Rowe just popped up with a question wondering whether it's 3/4 inch EMT or 3/4 inch conduit. EMT is apparently much lighter, and I can't say I know what EMT is.
I can't remember. I want to say it's conduit. I think it's the heavier stuff.
Guys, what you have to do is look into the fittings on the corners first. Look into them, and that's what you have to match.
Yeah.
If any of you guys want someone to source this for you, you can ask us here, and we'll send you an email for a guy who makes the whole package for you. He'll send it out with all the fittings, the tarps, he'll even cut the conduit for you too.
Conduit is a very general term. It doesn't mean anything by itself. Even PVC is considered conduit. So
yeah, it's the heavy
EMT
duty
is
stuff.
the type of conduit. PVC is a type of conduit. So I'm an electrician, so I know these things. Conduit means nothing to me if you don't describe what it is.
Extruded metal tubing is what Mike was referring to. Okay, so I think the difference between what extruded metal tubing and conduit is conduit has some sort of slipper when it comes to the metal stuff. Doesn't conduit have some sort of slippery stuff or slippery finish on the inside?
Yes, it is not extruded metal tubing. It is, I believe it's EMT conduit, which is lighter than extruded metal tubing because the wall thickness is a little thinner. Things are pretty easy to cut to length. Also, make sure you deburr the inside if you're cutting them yourself. Otherwise, you'll definitely slice your finger open. But they're not extruded metal tubing. They're EMT conduit. 3/4 inch for this one.
I just did a quick Google search, and if you can see my, this is the kind of thing we're talking about here. This doesn't have the, this has holes in it, so you can drill your conduit or whatever. The ones that I've got are more like this. This is actually very fancy. This is much more than what I've got. But there's all sorts of these things around out there. Whoops, that's not them. That's regular conduit. Anyway, yes, I think somebody was pointing out that you can get it a lot less expensive if you just go buy the parts and do it yourself. It's not real rocket science doing this stuff.
Yeah, although he doesn't make a ton on them, so I don't know about way less expensive, but a little less expensive if you want to take the time to do it yourself.
Yeah, I actually just had a project at work where I was using key clamps. Do you guys know what key clamps are? It's basically exactly what we're looking at. Allen key is what fastens them down, but they're heavy. And they use them on like temporary oil rigs and all sorts of stuff because they're OSHA whatever. And you could probably build one. You could probably build a tent like that out of key clamps for like, I don't know, $1,000. It's like literally crazy, like the cost of just these little heavy parts.
But by the way, that was Paul Patterson who was asking that question a couple weeks ago. So just wanted to give him a call out for asking that. That was a good topic to bring up.
Gotcha.
Here's
Okay.
another example of it.
Mhm.
Okay, where am I going?
Okay. Yeah, Greg's saying none of the light pollution filters are narrow enough, referring back to that for a DSLR. So if it's a modded DSLR, you can shoot 03 and you can shoot H alpha. But there is a reason a lot of us move over to mono because we start to think about all the light we're losing. And with the DSLR and narrowband, you're losing light. Renan, paper by Jay Smith regarding minimum exposure time for each light. I don't know if that's Josh Smith or I think there's another astronomer, Jay Smith, out there. But do you think this is a good way of determining exposure times, or how do you determine your exposure times? So not 100% certain what the paper's about. So basically, the kind of rule of thumb with a DSLR would be to make sure the histogram bump is separated from the left side. Once you get it separated, you're basically okay. You're starting to separate the signal off the very, very low end read noise of the camera. With a CCD, we can get the histogram, but more specifically, we get ADU counts, which I think a lot of us prefer to go by the mean ADU count on that. And basically, I think it's you want to have, let me think about how to phrase this. So with my camera, my bias introduces 1,000 ADUs into my camera. So I want to have my signal be 1,000 to 2,000 ADUs above that. I know people say 5%. Help me out here. What's that 5% thing?
May I step in here, Adam?
Go ahead.
Okay. The idea is that you want your signal noise to drown out any background noise and all the other noises that could be coming in. And the figure that many of us take is that you want your read noise and stuff like that to be 5% of your, you want your noise to be 5% of your signal. Now, how do you tell that? The easiest way to tell that is by measuring the background noise. And you do that by just clicking on or the value of the background. You do that by clicking on a background area, a dark area in your picture that doesn't have any real exposure. It's not no nebulosity, no anything. And there is a number for every particular sensor, depending on what the bias values, as Adam was talking about, and so forth. For every particular sensor, there is a number that is the ideal exposure. The idea is you let it get up to that long, and then you can let it go longer. But if you let it go longer, you run the risk of a satellite coming through, of your dog kicking the tripod, whatever it is that can happen. And you're not really getting any more. You've already drowned out all the read noise. It's down to 5% or less of your total image. So it's time to move on to the next exposure. So that's the overall guideline. And I'm not sure that's what the Jay Smith article is about, but that's the overall guideline. It's you expose to where you can get way up above the noise. And then once you're way up above the noise, it's time to start a new exposure. You have to fudge that because certain objects, what you really want is some really faint part of it, so you're going to have to expose longer. Other types of objects, like bright stars, you're going to, like if you're taking a picture of the double cluster, you want those stars. And if you wait long enough for that exposure to drown out the read noise, you're going to blow out your star colors. So you're going to want shorter exposure. Anybody else got anything to add to that general description?
No, I'll add that, I mean, this is one of those things you can make as easy or complicated as you want, right? The easy answer is if you can see the histogram, you just want to make sure that it's well separated from the left and that you can actually see a transition all the way down to 0 on the histogram. It doesn't look like it's clipped on the left. And generally at that point, you're pretty well past your read noise and everything else. It's a good enough starting point, right? Or you can go all the way and calculate exactly what your signal to noise ratio is based off of your read noise and your gain and dark current and download times and all sorts of factors, brightness, light flux and brightness of your target. You can add all of those things in and get very detailed and get very accurate. But generally what I've done is I'll do some of the math, and it helps me understand what's going on, what are good starting places, and then I'll pick some things that are close to that. Like maybe it tells me 4 minutes and 30 seconds is a good exposure time for my setup. So I just make that 5 minutes, right? And it's close enough, and then I do all my looms at 5 minutes from my house, unless the moon's up or something like that, right? So it can give you a good starting place and give you some good results that way. But a good place to start is just looking at the histogram, just making sure it isn't clipped anywhere.
Or you could do what I do. I call Josh and say, Josh, what camera are you using? I buy the same one and I ask him how much he exposes for.
Well, you got to also consider Josh may be using a different telescope with a different F ratio and taking a different object and stuff like that. But yeah, you're right. It's not nearly as complicated as we'd like to make it. Why don't we go start a question on cloudy nights and see how complicated this can get? Now, all my exposures out in the desert for my LRGB, for my L is 10 minutes. And for my RGB, it's 5 minutes. And I found that out by using the exposure calculators like you can find on Starzona and things like that. It's not nearly as complicated as we'd like to have it sound.
Bill Clugston, has anyone tried lithium iron phosphate batteries for portable power? And I'm interested in knowing if anybody in the room or anyone out there has, because they seem to be the next big leap in battery power capacity. Of course, they are really expensive right now.
Yeah, I've messed around with using some of the less expensive, smaller ones, and they sort of are what you think of them as. I mean, they definitely have a capacity that's closer to what it says it really is than maybe like a deep cycle marine battery. And they supposedly last a lot longer. I haven't used it enough times to know if it's really going to last a lot longer. But they're denser, and they're way more expensive. So I think that they might get there. I wouldn't go out. I think that to really last a night or two with one of those, you're probably looking at spending like $1,200 or something. So they're great, but still pretty expensive.
Yeah, I want to say at NEAF last year, the software BIS booth, they were using one, and they were powering their mount and that little portable PC they had.
Right. Those are low power demand things typically compared
Right.
to dew heaters or cameras with coolers on them, which is where instead of drawing a continuous like couple amps, you might be drawing another 5 or 6 amps or something like that.
Yep.
But yeah, you can get pretty small ones that'll run them out practically indefinitely, it seems like.
Okay, sorry, just making my way down the list.
I made a battery system with those Home Depot GO batteries. So they're at 56 volts, so you have to reduce them down to 12. So luckily, there are these really cheap adapters. They're made for golf carts that reduce 48 to 12. They work perfect from 56 down to operate anywhere between 48 to 60 volts and make perfect 12 volt DC. And they work really good. I have 3 of those batteries. 2 of them are in parallel, so I can charge the third one. So I keep one on charge and 2 of them on the thing. And because they're in parallel, you could take one off and put the other one, leave the other one, and you could swap batteries without losing power. It works out really good. But they're a little bit expensive.
Okay, next question coming in. How much of a difference does it make to separate the tube rings on a refractor? Stock rings seem too close together. It would make sense for stability reasons that the rings be further away from each other. It would make sense to have the rings as far apart, I guess, as they could be. But trying to think, if you're balanced from front to back and you're well balanced, I guess there's going to be a point where putting them further apart is going to be less beneficial. I'll tell you, all of my refractors are wide field refractors, so my rings are close together because my telescopes are really small. So I'm not the best one to answer that. And on my larger refractors, which are even still small refractors, I don't think the dovetail allowed me to push the rings farther apart, so I'm not sure about that. When you get up to a larger refractor, anyone in the room have a comment on that?
I have a little thing to say.
Mhm.
You really don't want to spread them too far apart. If you go too close to the lens and squeeze them, you might pinch the optics. That's something you may want to be careful. That's the only thing I was going to say.
Actually, Adam, I push my rings as far apart as I can on the refractors that the plate allows.
Mm-hmm. That the plate allows, right?
You're limited by things that are on the refractor, like the focusers, and by the plate. But other than that, I'd push them, far apart. But they could go further if the plate allowed,
Mm-hmm.
or if perhaps there wasn't a focus motor in the way or something else.
Okay. I think that's.
Does anybody have any actual numbers on that? It sounds like this is how I do it, and that's how I do it, but I'm not sure it makes much of a difference. I can see why.
You wouldn't want your rings close together, so the natural thing is is to,
Well,
there's no number here, you just,
You can do the math to see how much flexure you would get in your tube based on all the materials you have and
Yeah.
and everything like that. But I can tell you, if you look at my profile picture down on the bottom on the Tech 140, which is probably as big a refractor as most people use for imaging, that's a 7-inch Losmandy dovetail, and that's how far I have them split out, and I don't have any issues with any kind of tilt or sag. So I don't know that you need it to be any further out than that. If my camera was much heavier, then maybe it would make a difference. But I mean, it's a 3.5-inch feather touch with a big motor on it and everything. So, you know, I don't think that you're going to see much of an issue as long as you're, 7 inches apart. I might not keep them like 2 or 3 inches apart from each other.
It would seem to me that as long as they're substantial rings, as long as they're, they're fairly stable, you're just not going to see much difference from as long as it's over a certain minimum. If you put them right next to each other, yeah, I could see maybe a problem. But once they get 3 or 4 inches apart, whether they're 3 or 4 inches or 12 inches, and I mean, Josh, you're an engineer, right? I'm an old English teacher.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you could do the math. It's pretty unlikely that a tube is going to flex too much under its own weight along with the camera. That being said, I do think that having high quality rings is important because you can definitely get rings that are not as sturdy and they can move a little bit. You can see that on some of those rings if you just kind of shimmy them a little bit. And at that point, you could definitely see a little bit of movement. So I guess the short answer is as long as it's at least like 7 inches apart on a long refractor like that, you're going to be fine if they're heavy duty.
On those same lines, is there a difference on a Vixen versus Losmandy type of dovetail? Having used both, I prefer the Losmandy on my bigger tubes, and I prefer the Vixen on my smaller tubes. But the Losmandy is bigger and seems to be more rigid. I think it just depends on the scope.
I've definitely heard of Vixens flexing, and you can actually see them flex if you get a long enough one. But on some of those SCTs, the 11 and 14-inch SCTs, I think that some of those Vixen rails actually will flex a little bit. And you probably want to use either rings or an upgraded bar if you want to completely avoid flexure on that. The answer in Astro Imaging almost always is to use something heavier duty and more solid so that things don't move around. The only problem with doing that is that means that you're moving more weight around, so you need a heavier duty mount, and it kind of feeds on itself.
And one other thing I think you ought to consider is that the term Losmandy and the term Vixen, they actually belong to a manufacturer, respective manufacturers, and they are more nowadays used as dimensions rather than brand names. So if somebody says, I've got a Losmandy dovetail, maybe he does, maybe he's got an ADM, maybe he's got any one of a number of different manufacturers that happen to be the same dimension as the Losmandy D-style dovetails. That doesn't mean they're all the same, so that it goes back to that point that Josh was saying, make sure they're good, whatever they are.
Adam, I have another, I'll just actually make a point. Jamie Hansen asked about maybe doing an episode, and we could probably repeat this episode, about imagers who take wide field color data, possibly with one-shot color and higher resolution monochrome data, and then combine them together. So I've tried that for a while, where I was using 2 scopes at the same time on the same rig. I ended up just deciding it made more sense to get one larger scope that was as fast as the 2 together combined, and we can go through. That sounds like it will be a good episode. So Jamie, thanks for the idea on that. We did do an episode maybe a year and a half ago on collaborations, and I'm sure we'll be doing one again early or late next spring. But we did do one on collaborations, and David did a pretty in-depth conversation on how to combine data of different scales, at least in PixInsight. So you might want to look at look up the Astro Imaging Channel collaboration episode. That being said, it's probably a good topic for us to go after again. I don't think any of us right now are actively using 2 scopes on the same mount at the same time, but there's a lot to it to get it right, and there's not very many software programs that actually support that yet. A lot of them have talked about it for several years, but they don't. So especially if you care about synchronizing your dithering. At this point, there's not many that do it, but I think that maybe we'll do an episode on something like that before too long.
Yep. One more comment that I was reading from RYD Gaze regarding exposure length. We go with longer subs for faint structures to survive the culling from rejection algorithm applied during stacking. And then, for example, if the signal is real faint with short subs, the signal may not be in every sub, maybe in every few subs, and may get rejected. Yeah, and that's one of the, I think as David said earlier, you can think about it as, you can keep it as simple or go into it as deep as possible. And that gets down to where the math behind it actually helps you out, because you would be going on a pixel level basis, and you're talking about the dimmest structure that you want to be able to reveal based on the exposure length. And I think we had a long conversation about this probably after one of the shows, and was kind of pointed out that there will always be a dimness, a structure of a dimness that will prevent you from revealing it based on the rejection. There will always be, you can always make your exposures longer, assuming there's some sort of signal there. You can always make your exposures longer to pick up that. And it doesn't matter whether you're going from 1 minute to 2 minutes, 2 minutes to 5 minutes, 5 minutes to 10 minutes, or a half hour to literally 3 hour long subs. But the math will get to the point where it's showing you specifically which structures of which brightnesses you're losing. I think that at this point, I hope that at this point, when we're exposing for a half hour to an hour in narrowband, I think we're getting a lot of what's there. And after those half hour subs, it's just a matter of taking lots more subs of that same exposure length. But yeah, you based on the rejection, you could always be losing something. You could do a pure average stack and then probably bring some of it back and not necessarily deal with the rejection, but then you deal with, I guess, the quantization of it. If you're averaging something and over 10 subs you only get 1 photon, or over 100 subs you only get 1 photon, then what's it gonna show you by exposing longer? Is there enough there to really push it that far?
Adam?
Yes.
I've taken a few photographs and I've never actually made a calculation on how long it should be. It's either 15 or 30 minutes, but what does become important is how many subs I'm collecting in order to boost up the signal to noise in order to reveal those structures. So from a single exposure, I'm not sure what kind of calculation you could really make. But when you start summing it up and you look at the change in the SNR over those sums, that really tells you what your limits are more than the exposure length.
Well, I want to say that the basis of the question is, I mean, I guess it goes both ways, because you do longer to reveal the faint structures, but the culling of the faint structures, because rejection's thrown in there, that's a little bit different, because you can tweak the rejection. You can let the rejection not reject anything. Like basically you do a pure average. But it is actually, right now, with our current technology, I believe it is actually the exposure length, the individual sub-exposure length, that determines the dimmest structure you'll be able to expose when you've got those 50 exposures and you're stacking them. Because it becomes that, like I said, that kind of quantization. Is it averaging down to 0 or is it averaging up to 1? But yes, that's like quibbling over Iskabibble, because the absolute most important thing is really once you get a large portion of that signal separated from the read noise, once you get the histogram over to the right a little bit, then just take lots and lots and lots of those same subs, and as long as you have enough actual individual subs, then you're going to have a nice image.
Well, I would just add one thing. I mean, you're just pointing out the difference between theory and practice.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Well, let's look at this from another way. Go back to the original question. What is the ideal sub-exposure length? And the original answer was, there is no one answer to this. Okay, and so everybody is right in this discussion. There is no one answer to this, and so Eric and who was it that was saying that the reason we have to go extra long is to get that that real faint nebulosity. They're both right. Everybody's right. For those of you who are just turning into astroimaging for the first time, or for the early on, you probably know that there are some very popular objects, M31 and M42, both of which are very, very popular objects. Everybody wants to take these pictures, and what they don't realize is that they are actually very hard to take really good pictures of these things because they have an extreme range of brightness. And so when you ask what's the ideal exposure for M42 or M31, there is no one ideal exposure. So what most of us do when we want to take pictures of that is we take an ideal exposure that will get us the core of these things, which are very bright, and that exposure would be very short. And we take some exposures that are very long, and it gets us the very faint nebulosity way out on the edge, or the detail way out on the spiral arms of M31. And then we have to combine those into different exposures. And so the answer is the answer of what an ideal exposure is, it depends on what you're trying to get out of it. There is no one answer for that. Most of us, practically speaking, get to a point where with our rig, we know that 10 minutes for this and 4 minutes for that, and that's about it. And for instance, Eric, you were talking about they're either 10 or 15 minutes, or I think you said, Eric. Well, you're also, I think, probably talking about out in the Sierra foothills there, where it's a little bit darker than it is for most of us. So your times may be different than our times. And it all depends on where you are, what you're taking pictures of, and so forth and so on. There is no answer to that. Yeah.
I would absolutely agree with you. If you have a very bright object, you certainly have to take different lengths exposures to reveal those kinds of details. I was just saying, as a general rule, it's 15 and 30 minutes. But if I have something that's really bright, I will shorten it down and then feather that information in.
Yeah.
So you're right. There is no one exposure, or 2 or 3.
Oh, these comments are all over the board here. I'm not sure we've gotten them all yet here, Adam.
So there was a question on dew controllers that we were talking about, or Thomas had a question about dew controllers and which ones are best and stuff like that. Thomas, I still didn't see what telescope you're using, but a lot of them are the same, in all honesty. And really, the differences are you can get ones that have temperature probes on them, so that it actually will just keep it a few degrees above the dew point, and then or the ambient temperature. And then there's ones that are just open loop. The difference being that the ones that are open loop and cheaper may just waste a little more energy, and they may potentially cause issues if you're keeping them too hot because you are worried that dew will form. In practice, I haven't had any kinds of issues with that. I don't use a temperature compensating dew controller. I just use a regular, I think maybe Thousand Oaks or Kendrick dew controller, and I just, I kind of know whether or not it's going to be sort of dewy where I leave it on half, or really dewy where I leave it on like 3/4 or so. And so, some people I think don't put them on there unless they know it's going to be very dewy. For me, I just leave one on right in front of the objective, and then one down by my flattener, and I turn them on at the beginning of the night and just let them run all night. The other thing I think I've seen, especially with faster scopes, is that they seem to keep the temperature just a little bit more stable if there's swings, which I'll typically get here where I image, swings up and down, which can make focusing pretty challenging.
Sorry, muted my mic. And I've been talking to a muted mic for a little while because my dog was barking. We already went to our resident genius about the presentation on different stacking algorithms. But I'm trying to think back. Didn't we do a presentation on different stacking algorithms in case John wants immediate gratification a while ago? But I want to say we do have a presentation on that. It's worth Googling. If I get a spare second, I'll try Googling it myself. David, did you do one on that?
I don't know that we did one on different stacking algorithms. And I guess the question is, what do you mean by different algorithms? Do you mean different interpolations, different rejection algorithms?
The rejection algorithms.
David, I think that there's a basic misunderstanding about statistics. John Hayes, I think, was maybe where we're looking for that name. John did some stuff on this. I don't think we know what a bell curve is and why we care and things like that. And I think that if everybody understood those terms, we would all understand what the different rejection algorithms do a little bit better.
Meaning, what is a standard deviation? How does it relate to Gaussian distribution?
Right. And that kind of stuff. And some of us have had it in our statistics class, and we don't realize that it actually applies to our imaging class a lot too. That when we're if we average something, well, we're averaging the weirdnesses out on the end. But if we have a rejection algorithm that rejects certain level, well, then I think that's what people miss when they ask what's the difference in the algorithms. They never understand what the bell curve is, and therefore they don't understand what the rejection ideas are.
Well, John's presentation was excellent, but maybe we need to simplify it a little bit to make it a bit more approachable.
I think I could try to do that. That's still within the realm of things I can do. So I promise to do that at some point in the next month or two.
Okay. And we can chat about that offline and try and get something like that scheduled. Maybe then we'll let David take over after the fact and give us maybe an application in PixInsight that'll build off that framework.
Yeah, there's multiple aspects to stacking our data, and part of it isn't the stacking itself. It's actually the registration and how we do that with, techniques like Drizzle, which we have available now, which we didn't have before. And so yeah, we can definitely cover both of those parts.
Yeah, I'm seeing probably this will probably be our last question. I see the time really flew by, and this will probably be a question that'll lead into its own presentation on focusers. I'm sorry, I just lost the question somewhere. Okay, would appreciate pros and cons regarding on rotating focusers, Moonlight Nightcrawler, Optech similar focuser. Yeah, so that'd be something that we probably have to find some specific people with that gear who can go into it. And
are we talking rotators or focusers or
rotators was the specific question.
Yeah.
Rotating focusers, yes. So combo units. And the Nightcrawler's new. Tolga has the Nightcrawler. I don't know if any of us have an Optech. The Optech's relatively new as well. But it'd be that we'll have to organize that.
Yeah, I've got the Optech. If
you have the Optech.
Yeah, I've got the Gemini, specifically the Optech focuser rotator.
Okay, well, maybe what we'll do, I mean, obviously, going through focusers, focusing rotators, all that stuff, that could be an episode to itself. So I think what we'll do is we'll call it a night for tonight, and we'll do some stuff on the back end to try and get organized for next week, which we will be having a session next week with an actual topic, despite how well these open discussions go. We got lots of questions, we got lots of comments, and I think a lot of people are figuring out some cool stuff right now. Looks like they're trying to build their own dew heater, dew strips. Cool stuff. But yeah, so we will, you'll probably see the session posted sometime midweek, and it's basically all we got. So thanks for coming. Oh yeah, I started this off early in advance. Anyone interested in presenting? Anybody have a cool piece of gear that we're all curious about? Whether it's well, you already heard it, focusers, rotating focusers, etc. But you know how it works. You get a new camera, like a CMOS camera, or basically anything out there. Let us know if you want to give a video review of it, whatever way it can. You want to give us your perspective on something, we're open. It's pretty hard to keep coming up with new stuff every single week. And every time I come up with a good idea, I look at the list and it turns out we presented on it like 2 years ago. So we're going to start repeating ourselves if we don't. But autofocuser, another vote for autofocuser. So there we go. We're on the right track. But yeah, thanks for coming, guys. See you next week. I like that. Flat Earth debate.